Hi, I'm Liz.
And I'm Rhea.
Welcome to Karma's My Bitch, a podcast about love,
sex,
connection,
abundance,
joy,
purpose,
peace,
and how life isn't simply the stories we tell ourselves. Can you experience happiness when you've experienced profound trauma?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I mean, no matter the trauma, the hurt, the pain, or the woundedness anyone has ever experienced, you can always reach happiness. It just might require a bit more perseverance on their end. Back in season 3, we were still talking about karma. And we were talking about the happiness scale. And in understanding that happiness scale, where happiness was at the very top, we effectively said, well, what comes after that is bliss.
Yeah.
So we assumed then that happiness, or whatever came after happiness being bliss, and happiness was therefore the precursor to bliss.
Yeah.
Like that you wouldn't get to bliss otherwise. But we've come to reason, though, that that's not necessarily true. You can get to bliss in other ways. And while happiness is critical in many ways to our growth and evolution, because that's when we're really understanding the divine, there are steps to bliss that you could get to where you would almost, we wouldn't say bypass happiness, but you would maybe skip, jump, hop past it. So you'd land yourself into bliss without really having to work through this path to happiness that we're talking about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
But I mean, I'm sure that's really rare, right?
We wouldn't say it's rare, but it would be unusual.
As we mentioned in season 9, to be in bliss is what's needed for you to get to the unwritten parts of your fate. To be in bliss is to understand that effectively you're the divine on earth, right? And you're like awe and wonderment and all the other stuff. Yeah. And so happiness is the natural way one can do that, because the more and more happiness grows, the more divinity you recognize within oneself. But it's not the given to get to bliss, because you could just have a really strong spiritual body.
Yeah.
Or you could make certain choices that avoid having to undo some beliefs. My guess, though, is that's probably the differentiation between those who've experienced profound trauma and not. Because I can't imagine that you would get to bliss without happiness if you have had a lot of trauma, hurt, pain, woundedness, etc. Yeah.
It's that kind of trauma and that kind of pain that tells us that, like, life is bleak, right? That certain things can't be overcome and that we have just enough or barely energy to survive. Yeah. So there's and nothing else, right? So getting to happiness can just be that impossibility or an improbability. But it's interesting because it's that very mechanism that, despite what we've been through or where we've been, that mechanism that tells us to get through another day, that's the same mechanism that can actually get us to happiness.
Well, yeah, it's the perseverance, right?
Exactly. And it is so critical.
It's the thing is, if you can get out of bed on bleak days over and over again, then you have the stamina and the strength to, once you're at a place where things are good, to keep striving for more.
Yep.
And so it makes sense that, like, even though, you know, you would think, oh, like those who have profound pain and suffering have like a greater capacity for happiness, because that's what separation tells us, right? Like, the more pain you have, the more you fall, the harder you rise. It's all that crap that I really just fundamentally don't agree with. But it's more that you have enough light to push through even the darkest times. That means that if you're not in the darkest times, how much light can you really shine? Because you already had it when things were really fucking bleak.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so, yeah. And like you had said, when you can imagine for yourself more, and we don't mean the fantasy more either. So the distinction here is to understand, because sometimes, and I've seen this, you know, you come from poor countries and poor cultures, you know, there's the fantasy. Somebody's going to save me. Somebody's going to come in. Maybe I'll have the winning lottery ticket. But life is fundamentally just so difficult that in many ways nothing shifts. But if you can tap into the more and be willing to take the steps towards the more, as you said, that's how you can will a different reality. Because the ability to understand and picture the more is what helps get
Bring
you
it forward.
Exactly. But again, not in the fantasy way of I'm going to go from, living on the streets to living in a mansion. It's possible, there are definitely plenty of stories. The American dream is certainly based on rags to riches. And we often hold those stories up as, possibilities and
in order for us to strive against.
Exactly. And that's nothing, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, those are certain people's stories. And those are examples of what it takes, right? That perseverance.
But that doesn't work when you're looking at something like the American dream, if I may say, if I understand the American dream correctly. Because
I'm not saying the American dream is correct. All I'm saying is that things are
I know. But what I'm saying is, like, for that, for example, it's get to America, number one. And then when you're there, you just work really fucking hard until you're able to, like, create everything that you want, because you'll be given it in the world of separation for doing the hard work. Right? Mm-hmm. So the American dream is also buying into all the existing structures that are in place.
Yeah.
Or anywhere. Like, I mean, that's, you'll come to a European country or you'll go anywhere and that's what you'll get. But the thing is that when I think about trauma and pain and all those kind of things, and I think about myself, because I'm, as we always joke, thank God I'm not an empath, but also in that respect, it's less useful in this instance because I always kind of have to apply it to myself. But if I think about how many lessons I had in terms of, with the lesson was always, you can always listen to yourself. You have the power to change your reality, and the reality you know to be true in your heart can be your actual reality. And when I say you know it to be true in your heart, for me, I thought it was a fantasy. I thought it was a dream, but actually it was my reality, right? In order for me to get to that place where I fully believed in myself, all the versions of me that didn't believe it was possible due to the shit that had happened to me in the first place, those versions had to die. So, for example, I mean, all my examples will be bullshit, but let's say I didn't believe X or Y was possible. And then I follow my heart, I act in a specific way, and I find out that that wasn't true. So the version of me that didn't believe it was possible died, and a new version of me in its place that did believe it was possible, right? And in doing so, I healed something old and I learned something new, which is weirdly what I'm saying in this season, but I haven't said for a fucking long time. Probably because we're talking about like more karma and stuff like that, and we haven't done that for a while either. So all those parts of us that held on to our pain, that held on to our woundedness, and that kept believing that that was all we would ever know, those are the parts that we're shedding off. And what's left are the parts of us that know it is possible. And I'm not saying that like we forget, because a lot of people say, oh, like time heals all wounds and you just move forward and everything's fine. I'm not saying that at all, because I don't think actually that's the case. I think why we may not remember why we're acting a certain way, time hasn't healed the wound. It's just buried it deeper. So it's not about forgetting. It's just allowing ourselves to be humble enough. And I guess that's the humility piece from the redemption arc episode, to accept that life as we knew it isn't all that it is. The versions of us that held onto that trauma and that believed those things aren't not us. It's not like we're disassociation. They're just old versions of us. It's a bit like if I look at my toddler nephews, right? They barely know how to hold a pencil. At some point, they're going to learn how to hold a pencil. At some point, they're going to learn how to write their name. At some point, they're going to be able to write essays. At some point, who knows? One of them might become a very accomplished writer, right? Or an artist, or something that involves holding a pen. It's not that the version of themselves that didn't know how to hold a pen when they were 3 years old doesn't exist anymore. They still exist, but they've grown up enough that they now know how to hold the pen, and they also know what to do with it.
Oh, they have the muscle development, right?
Yeah, and also the brain development and the learning and everything else. But it's kind of the same thing in the sense that it's not that whatever happened to us to make us believe that isn't a version of us. And that's kind of what letting go teaches us to do as well, right? Oh, that's just an old you've grown up now, it doesn't matter, it doesn't exist, blah, blah. It's just...
That was 2 years ago. That's not who you are today.
Exactly. And in some respects, it's true. But it's not because I've forgotten who I am or disassociated and I haven't healed. It's I've I've healed those parts of me, right? And I've accepted that was my experience, but I've healed the trauma. And so I'm humble enough to have expanded that perspective, to see that and other possibilities too. I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
You are. But again, if you've brought the person of you from 2 years before into your present because it still is a part of your identity, then no, it's not finished, right?
No.
And so you really have had to pretty much shed even the person that you became as a result of that trauma. So you no longer feel like that person, can barely recognize that person, as if it's just an old version of you. And the one thing that you also have to shed, as you kind of said, you know, when you die and you die again, is because you can shed those old versions of yourself, not just because you decide it's no longer convenient to have it.
But just because it has no emotional charge anymore. And actually,
right.
It's not like it never happened. It's just, it happened.
Right. So effectively, when massive trauma happens, what can happen is that we can have it in our pain body, as in something, and that's what triggering is. So something that is unhealed, while we might have healed it in our mental body, we might have healed it in our emotional body, we can actually hold it in our pain bodies.
Do we have pain bodies as well? Do we all have pain bodies?
Well, no. It's like that part of us that experiences when we get triggered, it experiences the pain of that wounding. Yeah. So sometimes we might have healed a lot of things, but something can happen and it's as if we're there again. Or I think it's a bit like what my dad talked about, like in his experiences in Vietnam, and how many decades it really took to work through a lot of the guilt and shame that he carried and how much that really marked him. So it has taken him a really long time to be able to heal that, even if he could sort of therapize his way through. We're really talking about really deep trauma. Those experiences can really result in pain that we carry, and in a way in which it might just take a long time to be able, in a way where we don't think we'll ever be able to move past it or drop those pain bodies. But it is definitely possible. It is definitely possible.
Can I just ask a question? So when we experience such profound trauma, we create a new body, but a pain one?
No, not quite like that. It's just more that if we can only carry our woundedness in so many ways that we then attach it to ourselves. Is probably the best way to describe it. It's not the same as disassociation, like you said, where, you know, you cut yourself off and you're like, okay, well, that bit didn't happen to me. And therefore that's just, you know, like you had said, I think in your letting go chapter, that's not, it was like what? It's the ego's way of saying, you know, we're not our hurt. Like, I'm not defined. This doesn't have to define, like my pain doesn't have to define me,
but
right?
It barely existed in the first place.
Exactly. And we know that to be true when we really connect to our most divine selves. I'm not going to say the other word, because we can tell ourselves, well, we didn't deserve it and it wasn't us. But if we actually, as we know, if we allow ourselves to own the experiences and take agency over it, which is, I may not be responsible to a degree for what happened, but I made certain choices that somehow landed me there, even if what happened wasn't my fault. So that helps us come out of the loop we end up getting stuck in that we're really trying to avoid. And that's the loop that doesn't allow us to evolve.
And also, I'm assuming it's also like, I'm not going to let it define me either in my victimhood or in my survivorship. It's going to be something I heal so that it doesn't define me at all. That's the point, right? To live.
Yeah. So the more we live, right? Even if, and I'm not saying live to escape what happened, but the more life we allow and the more choices we make to develop ourselves, right? To tap into our purpose, to figure out what our purpose even is, to pursue curiosity, is how we can actually put space between us and that point of trauma, right? And when you allow time and space between your present moment and that point of trauma, each time you confront, like, as we said, you know, your present moments will somehow allow you to confront the past without having to relive the past. That does help you make different choices and empower yourself step by step, right? That is kind of one of the ways in which we say you can help burn out your karma.
It's funny, it's kind of what I feel we're doing now globally as well, a little bit.
Yeah.
right? We're seeing, we're in the present, but we're confronting all our past traumas as a collective, and we're being given opportunities to choose differently, so that we know that other choices are possible and other worlds are possible as a result. Regardless, happiness is possible for all of us in this lifetime, and holding that space for it and teaching how to find it, how to keep it, and how to make it our norm, I guess, is a beautiful endeavor in a world where everything's falling apart around us, in order to show us where we've given away our chances for happiness, abundance, all those things. Because it is far easier, joyful, better to grow and evolve through joy and being stretched slightly, rather than this like deep, awful pain. Even when I sometimes used to get quite caught up in what was around us and what I was seeing, and the collective trauma, which was way worse and awful than anything I'd personally experienced, I had to kind of go back and revisit trust and faith and hope and knowing, like those tenets of trust, the four trusts, which also make the foundation of love, so that I could remember that I was able to create my own life, and I could feel that love and remember that there was something bigger than me. Because regardless of how anyone feels about divinity or God or religion or spirituality or anything, love in its purest form, when as we experiencing, shining our light, being in our purpose, doing something that we enjoy, seeing it reflected back to us from someone else, sourcing and be sourced as the whole last season, it reminds us that there's something that feels bigger than anything else we feel. And that allows us then maybe even just be a bit curious. And I think that opens us up. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one of the fundamental concepts behind this is effectively freedom.
Okay.
Because when we allow our trauma and our pain and our woundedness to define our lives,
we're not free from it.
We're not free from it ever. Even if we've overcome it and it's been part of our niche purpose, right? Like, or we've turned it into a purpose. Like, I've overcome this and this is my identity. That's effectively your pain identity.
Yeah.
That's not your purest self-expression, which is your divine identity. That's just your human identity.
Yeah. And
I've overcome this human hurdle of separation, right? That I had to go through.
But it also makes the commonality between all humans pain rather than anything else. Everyone bonds over their shit. That's how people connect to each other, because
of the trauma bond.
Yeah, but just even in general, I mean, trauma bond, I can't even hear that word, but life sucks and then you die is how everyone bonds with everything. It's very rare for someone to say, how are you? And your response to be like, oh, I'm great. People
actually mean it.
And also actually mean it, but also people don't like a happy person because they want to bond with someone over the shit they face. Because, the other thing is for so long, everyone's like, oh, you just do a stiff upper lip, especially being English or British or whatever. And then inside you feel all your feelings. So when you do open up to someone about a feeling, then they're like, oh my God, they're letting their walls down and they're being so vulnerable. We really connected. But if everyone's connecting on their pain, they're not really connecting to anything other than their pain and then reflecting it back to someone else. It doesn't really work. I don't know what your point was that made me go off on my whole tangent, but.
No, I was just sort of talking about how freedom is from that self, which is hence shedding the layer and allowing all those pieces to die. And it goes back to the previous episode, just the previous one where you were talking about how when you are that focused on abundance, right? In terms of your heart meter is turned toward it and you're on and aligning with it does mean that sometimes things have to fall away. So the people that you might have bonded with while you were in your pain may no longer be your friends. I mean, that's what my dad had said, when he was drinking, he had a lot of friends. When he wasn't drinking, he didn't. The point is that when you change and when you shift and when you evolve, there's a lot that you don't take with you. And that is really one of the scariest things of all. Can I be myself without my pain? Can I know myself without my trauma? Because it's all I've known.
But I guess, yeah, you can.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. For more information, articles, and inspiration, find us at karmasmybitch.com and at karmasmybitch.insta.
And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review.